every confession, every prayer, every act of penitence. It all happens under the watchful eye of a church that has been desperately praying that its own worst sins, its most horrifying betrayals of morality and trust, would remain locked in the darkness. Until now. For nearly 2,000 years, the Catholic Church has stood as a fortress of faith, its cathedrals rising like monuments of eternity, its rituals promising salvation. But beneath the incense, the candles, and the chants lies another story. A story written not in Holy Scripture, but in secrecy. A story of silence, power, and betrayal. Behind the gilded altars, beyond the marble columns, deep in archives sealed from the public eye, are truths so unsettling that to reveal them would shake the very foundations of faith itself. This is not the story the Church once told. This is the story of what they tried to hide.
Beneath the heart of Vatican City, hidden behind reinforced doors and layers of armed security, lies one of the most secretive collections of knowledge in human history. They call it the Vatican Secret Archives. 53 miles of shelving. Over 35,000 volumes. Ancient scrolls, papal decrees, maps, and manuscripts dating back over 1,000 years. The Church insists this is nothing more than an archive of history, accessible only to trained scholars. But the secrecy surrounding it has fueled centuries of rumor. What if these archives are more than history? What if they hold the truths the Church never wanted the world to see? Among the whispered legends are documents that challenge the very foundations of Christianity. Lost Gospels, accounts of Jesus and his followers that were deemed too dangerous for the faithful to read. The Gospel of Judas, painting the traitor not as a villain, but as a chosen confidant. The Gospel of Mary Magdalene, describing her not as a repentant sinner, but as a leader, perhaps even closer to Christ than the apostles themselves. What would it mean if the role of women, erased for centuries, was once central to the Church's story? And then there are darker whispers still. That hidden in these vaults are records of heresies stamped out by fire and sword. Evidence of knowledge destroyed during the Inquisition. Letters from Galileo, condemned for revealing truths the Church was not ready to accept. But the legends do not end with theology. Some claim the archives contain accounts of strange encounters, reports of objects in the skies, unexplained visitors, ancient technologies, and even artifacts tied to civilizations long vanished. Is it possible that the Church, guardian of souls, has also been the guardian of something else, knowledge of powers not of this earth? The Vatican dismisses these as conspiracy, insisting the archives are simply private records. Yet why are only a select few, carefully chosen scholars, granted access? And why are entire categories of documents restricted, guarded with almost obsessive secrecy? The Bible tells us in Luke 8 verse 17, "For there is nothing hidden that will not be disclosed, and nothing concealed that will not be known or brought out into the open." But in these chambers, hidden beneath centuries of silence, lies the unsettling truth: some things were never meant to be revealed. What truth is so dangerous, so explosive, that the Vatican would rather it be buried in darkness than risk it ever coming into the light? The year is 1231. Pope Gregory IX issues a decree that will forever stain the history of the Church. It is the birth of the Holy Inquisition, a system designed to root out heresy, but one that quickly grew into a machine of terror. Across Europe, whispers became accusations. Accusations became trials. And trials became death sentences, carried out in the name of Christ. The Church declared itself the guardian of truth, and anyone who dared question its teachings was branded a heretic. What followed was centuries of fear. Torture chambers were filled with the cries of men and women whose only crime was to think differently, to read forbidden books, to speak words the church had not approved. They were stretched on the rack until their limbs snapped. They were strapped into iron chairs heated from below until flesh peeled away. They were bound with weights and lowered into water until breath was gone. And yet, this was not only about faith. It was about control. The Inquisition silenced voices of scientists, philosophers, and dreamers. Whole traditions of knowledge, pagan, Jewish, Muslim, and even Christian sects, were erased from history at the edge of the sword and the flame of the pyre. The numbers remain uncertain, but historians agree, thousands perished. Entire communities were uprooted. Books were burned in public squares, their knowledge vanishing into smoke. What could not be destroyed was locked away, hidden in the very archives of the Vatican we have just uncovered. To the faithful, this was presented as salvation, the purification of the soul. But for those who suffered, it was nothing less than state-sanctioned terror under the seal of the cross. The Bible itself says in John 8 verse 32, "Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." Yet during the Inquisition, truth was a weapon. It was defined, controlled, and twisted by those in power, used to chain entire populations in fear. And so we are left to ask, was this about faith, or was it about dominance? Was it about saving souls, or preserving absolute control over the human mind? As the flames of the pyres died down, the silence that remained was deafening. A silence that still lingers across history, a silence that hides a deeper, darker question. How much of what we know today is truth, and how much is simply what survived the fire? For as long as the Catholic Church has existed, it has stood as the final authority on good and evil, heaven and hell, angels and demons. And in its long history, few practices have been shrouded in more secrecy, fear, and fascination than the rite of exorcism. Officially, the Church teaches that demonic possession is real. That unseen entities can take hold of a human body, twisting their voice, contorting their flesh, even driving them to madness or death. To combat this, priests are armed with a powerful ritual, the rite of exorcism, a prayer calling upon the authority of Christ himself to drive the demon out. But what happens behind those closed doors is rarely seen. Testimonies describe hours, sometimes days, of screaming, thrashing, and violence. Crucifixes pressed against burning skin. Holy water poured onto faces contorted in rage. Latin invocations shouted over voices that did not sound human. And when it ended, not every subject survived. The Church has always insisted exorcism is rare, reserved for the most extraordinary cases. Yet evidence suggests that hundreds, even thousands, of exorcisms have been performed, many hidden away, never spoken of outside the parish walls. In some cases, the possessed were children. In others, they were people suffering from mental illness, misunderstood and mistreated in the name of faith. But darker whispers exist. That deep beneath the Vatican, in chambers the public never sees, rituals are performed not for show, but for secrecy. Rituals meant not to protect the faithful, but to contain something the Church cannot control. Some conspiracy theorists claim that there are entities chained beneath the catacombs, forces too dangerous to release, too disturbing to acknowledge. The Bible tells of such power. In Mark 5, Jesus confronts a man possessed by a legion of demons, who cry out, "Do not send us out of this region." The unspoken implication is clear: spirits can be bound, contained, even imprisoned. But if the Son of God could command them, what happens when mere men try to do the same? The Vatican denies it all. Yet why, then, does it maintain an official office of exorcism? Why does it train priests in a ritual most of the modern world dismisses as myth? And why, in recent years, has the Church reported a surge in cases, so many that some dioceses cannot keep up with demand? In every age, there are stories of exorcisms gone wrong. The girl in Germany who died after 70 rituals in a single year. The boy in America whose story inspired a novel, and later a film, that shocked the world. And countless others, nameless, forgotten, their suffering written only in silence. Which leaves us with the most chilling possibility of all: what if the Church knows more than it dares to admit? What if its silence is not ignorance, but fear? And so we must ask, does the Vatican guard these rituals simply to save the faithful, or is it hiding something else? Something far older, far darker, and far more real than we were ever meant to believe? For centuries, the Catholic Church stood as a beacon of morality, preaching virtue, sacrifice, and the sanctity of the human soul. But behind its walls, another story was unfolding, one of betrayal, silence, and broken trust. The scandals did not begin in the modern age. They can be traced through centuries. Whispered accusations, hushed relocations of priests, and communities that dared not speak against the institution that commanded both their faith and their fear. For every candle lit in prayer, there were shadows the Church worked tirelessly to extinguish. The most haunting of these shadows is the story of abuse. Generations of children, boys and girls, altar servers, students in Catholic schools, orphans in church-run institutions, left scarred by those who claimed to be shepherds of their souls. Their innocence violated not by outsiders, but by the very men entrusted with their protection. And when survivors found the courage to speak, the institution that should have defended them often did the opposite. Files were locked away. Priests were quietly transferred from parish to parish. Victims were pressured into silence, their suffering buried beneath layers of secrecy. In Ireland, entire orphanages became sites of horror, where nuns and priests inflicted cruelty upon children who had no one else to turn to. In America, investigations revealed decades of cover-ups, with entire dioceses implicated. And across Latin America, Africa, and beyond, the same pattern emerges, the same culture of silence, replicated again and again. The emotional toll is immeasurable. Faith turned to fear. Trust turned to trauma. For many survivors, prayer itself became a reminder of betrayal. The very symbols of salvation, the crucifix, the confessional, the priest's robes, became symbols of torment. In Matthew 19 verse 14, Christ said, "Let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these." And yet, those who claimed to represent him often did the unthinkable, wounding the very souls he called most precious. The question lingers: how could an institution so powerful, so deeply rooted in the lives of billions, allow this silence to continue for so long? Was it fear of scandal? Fear of losing authority? Or was it something more, a culture where protecting the Church mattered more than protecting the innocent? And what does it say about a faith built on confession, when the gravest sins were never confessed publicly, but buried in sealed vaults? The scandal is not only what happened, but how it was hidden. And as truth continues to emerge, one must wonder, how many voices still remain unheard? How many stories remain untold? And how many shadows still stretch across the halls of a church that claims to walk in the light? Faith may move mountains, but money moves empires. And for the Catholic Church, the wealthiest religious institution in the world, power has always flowed not only from the altar, but from the vault. The Vatican is not just a spiritual center. It is also a sovereign state, with its own bank, its own diplomats, and its own ties to the most powerful nations and families of the modern age. Behind the marble walls of St. Peter's, fortunes have been exchanged, wars influenced, and governments swayed. The Vatican Bank, officially known as the Institute for the Works of Religion, has long been shrouded in secrecy. Ostensibly created to fund charitable works, it became notorious for something very different: shadow accounts, money laundering, and ties to organized crime. Investigations across the 20th century revealed a web of connections stretching from Rome to the Sicilian Mafia, from corrupt financiers to global corporations. The Church, which preached poverty, was moving billions in silence. And money was not the only currency. Influence was wielded with equal ruthlessness. From the crusades that bled nations dry, to the blessing of kings and emperors, to whispers of involvement in modern politics, the Vatican has often stood not outside of history, but at the center of its most violent turns. One death in particular still casts a long shadow. In 1978, Pope John Paul I sat on the throne of St. Peter for just 33 days. He had vowed to confront corruption within the Vatican Bank and root out those entangled with criminal organizations. Then, suddenly, he was found dead in his bed. The official report declared a heart attack. But questions arose immediately. His body was discovered by nuns, not doctors. His papers disappeared. And rumors of poisoning spread like wildfire. Was his death natural? Or was it the silencing of a reformer who threatened the balance of money and power? The Church has never reopened the investigation. To this day, the Vatican maintains its veil of silence. But historians, journalists, and even some insiders insist the truth was buried with him. Blood has often followed power in the Church's history. Wars were launched with papal blessing. Assassinations whispered of in corridors of stone. Entire nations brought to their knees by papal decrees. And always, at the intersection of faith and politics, stood the Church, a player as ruthless as any king, any tyrant, any empire. The irony is stark. Christ himself warned in Matthew 6 verse 24, "You cannot serve both God and money." Yet for centuries, the Church has done both, serving God in word, but serving power in action. And so the question must be asked, how much blood has been spilled, how many lives manipulated, not for the salvation of souls, but for the preservation of an empire? There are secrets so profound, so unsettling, that even within the vast silence of the Church, they remain sealed away in whispers and prophecy. These are not scandals of money or flesh, but mysteries that reach into the very soul of faith, and perhaps beyond. In 1917, in a small Portuguese village called Fatima, 3 shepherd children claimed to see a vision of the Virgin Mary. She revealed to them 3 prophecies. 2 were eventually disclosed, visions of hell and the foretelling of world wars. But the third, the so-called third secret of Fatima, was withheld for decades. When the Vatican finally released it in 2000, it described a bishop in white falling under gunfire, interpreted by some as the assassination attempt on Pope John Paul II. But critics insist the truth was far darker. Some believe the real prophecy spoke of a catastrophic betrayal within the Church, or even the end of the institution itself. Why, if the prophecy was so straightforward, did the Vatican guard it so closely, for so long? What was in those words that made popes tremble? Beyond prophecy, there are relics, sacred objects that vanish from the pages of history only to reappear in rumor. The spear of destiny, said to have pierced the side of Christ, whispered to grant victory to whoever holds it. The Holy Grail, a vessel of divine power. Bones of saints, fragments of the true cross, artifacts that might alter the story of faith itself. Are these relics scattered across the world, lost to time? Or are some locked away beneath the Vatican, hidden from eyes unworthy to behold them? And then there are the whispers of something even more extraordinary. For centuries, the Church has looked to the heavens, maintaining one of the oldest observatories in the world. Officially, it is to study God's creation. But some insist there is another reason. Why has the Vatican spoken cautiously, even openly at times, about the possibility of extraterrestrial life? Why would an institution built on the story of salvation for mankind prepare itself for the idea that we are not alone? If knowledge of other worlds, other beings, has been discovered, then the faith of billions could be shaken in an instant. Imagine the revelation, that humanity was never the sole focus of creation. That salvation itself may not be ours alone. The unanswered mysteries multiply. Prophecies locked away. Relics that vanish into silence. Secrets written not in scripture, but in codes, vaults, and shadows. Each question points to one conclusion: there is more than we are being told. Revelation 22 verse 10 commands, "Do not seal up the words of the prophecy of this book, for the time is near." And yet, for centuries, the Church has done precisely that, sealing away visions, prophecies, and truths that could transform our understanding of the divine. And so we must ask, is the Vatican protecting faith, or protecting itself? Across the centuries, the Catholic Church has stood as both shepherd and sovereign. It has comforted the dying, baptized the newborn, and whispered forgiveness to the broken. But it has also silenced dissenters, hidden its sins, and locked away knowledge that could change the world. From the secret archives that stretch like veins beneath Vatican City, to the tortured cries of heretics condemned in the Inquisition. From the whispered chants of exorcists in hidden rooms, to the shattered lives of the innocent silenced by scandal. From the gold and blood that fed its empire, to the prophecies, relics, and mysteries still hidden in its vaults. One truth emerges: the Catholic Church is not only a sanctuary of faith, but also a fortress of secrets. And yet, faith endures. Cathedrals still fill with light. Bells still ring. Millions still kneel and pray, believing in a God beyond all human corruption. The paradox remains: an institution that proclaims divine truth, while burying earthly truths in silence. But silence cannot last forever. For as Scripture says in Luke 12 verse 2, there is nothing concealed that will not be disclosed, or hidden that will not be made known. The question is not whether the secrets will one day be revealed. The question is, will humanity be ready for what lies inside? When the vaults are opened, when the archives spill their hidden words, when the walls of silence finally crack, will it strengthen faith, or shatter it? That is the darkest secret of all.